It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
All right, Brian, this next question is from Kevin. Kevin said, what do you recommend I do with annual RSUs, restricted stock units? Should I keep them in the company stock or sell and buy some type of fund to reduce the exposure? So, Brian, this is not an uncommon scenario. Somebody works for a publicly traded company. A portion of their compensation comes in restricted stock units. They get granted some stock that vests over some period of time, and so part of their annual compensation that's taxable at the date of vesting is RSUs. Okay, well, it happened. I paid tax on it. Now what? What do I do with it, and why do I do that with it?
Yeah, I think this is a question we deal with executives and others. I give them the cautionary tale, and I'll let you get into the strategy in a minute, but I want to give you have to be careful, and this is kind of you guys know, I was managing money in the 90s, and coming from Atlanta, there was a lot of Lucent executives that we worked with, a few of them, and they all thought that their trees were growing to heaven. And we all know the rest of the story. A lot of younger people probably have never even heard of Lucent, but that's why I've had, like, on the content team, I was like, you realize Lucent Technologies was booming, like we think about Tesla and we think about all the stuff that it's done really well in the past. Those ARK investments that, last year were everybody's darling. This year, everybody's like, whoo, whoo. But it's the same thing. So when you work for a company, sometimes when you're on the inside, you do have a blind spot in the fact that we're all kind of super excited or think things are going well, even if you don't know necessarily there might be trouble on the horizon. So I always tell people, be careful having your human capital, your working capital tied too much to the place you also have your financial capital. Because part of the thing, and this is something I've explained to business owners too, is that you're supposed to use your time, your wages, your growth that you get from income to hopefully diversify in outside assets that will create financial independence in the long term. And if you have all your net worth as well as your human capital and working capital all in the same company, it could turn out to be spectacular if you work for that darling company that does well. But I've also seen the cautionary tale where it turns into a complete disaster. So we always recommend try to keep, and it's hard for everybody who's got very generous employers, because maybe it's also you have an employee stock purchase plan with a 15% discount. You have the RSUs that are coming in. It's not uncommon that you'll find that you end up with a lot more of your employer stock than you even realize. Do you want to keep those numbers, somewhere between 5 to 10%, really depending upon what you have going on in your total financial life? Now, Bo, you actually deal with a number of executives, and I know we have a whole team that works with executives. What are some of the technician type stuff that they need to pay attention to as well?
One of the unique things about RSUs is that they are taxable on the date that they vest. So if you are thinking about liquidating or reducing your exposure, the time when you can do that with the least tax consequence is likely on the day or the day after that they vest, because you're only going to pay any sort of gains, they'd be short term, on the movement from the vesting date price to the price in which you sell. The longer you hold that, the more you have opportunity for the price to change and to likely have a taxable event. And if you obviously hold it for over a year, it would be subject to long-term capital gains. Options are a little bit different because options, you get to choose when the taxability takes place. It's actually taxable not at the date of vesting, but when you exercise those. And then with employee stock purchase plans, again, those are taxable when you sell those shares. So one of the things you want to do, if you are someone who has these multiple different types of incentives, you just want to have a plan in place. We see it all the time where somebody might have 30 or 40% of their total wealth tied up in their company stock, and they can't just go to 5 to 10% overnight. So we try to put together a strategy to get them there in a reasonable time frame that takes into account their investment circumstance, the risk tolerance, their tax situation. And no two circumstances and situations are exactly the same. They can vary a little bit from person to person. Now, one interesting word of caution that I would tell you to think about when it comes to making these financial decisions. In times of volatility, a lot of stocks right now are being beaten up just because they're stocks, not necessarily because something is wrong with the company or the earnings missed or there's a fundamental change or something like that. If you work for a company and you're working through this strategy of selling your stock to try to redeploy, you need to ask the question about, okay, if my company stock is down 30%, but the S&P 500 is down 20%, and I sell my company stock and I buy the S&P 500, do I have a reasonable belief that when the market recovers, the S&P 500 or whatever will likely rebound more quickly than my company stock? In volatile times when a lot of things are down and they're down just from correlated reasons, not because of specific fundamental reasons, you might have to think through, okay, should I make this decision now or should I wait 3 months, 6 months, 9 months until it seems like some of the volatility has worked its way out of the system?
I was just going to give a nerdy little pro tip that I see, and probably shouldn't give this tip because it might cost me business, is that we have gotten so many clients from the fact that they come to us because they start getting IRS letters because they didn't report their employee benefits, these RSUs, stock options, and other things, right? Because we all hear, hey, a lot of ththese things just roll onto your W-2. They're going to show up in your compensation. So it's not uncommon. You hear that, you think that, and you just, when you do your taxes, you have your tax preparer or you do it yourself with TurboTax. You just you fill in the forms from your W-2 and you're like, no fuss, no mess. It's all taken care of. But the reality is that typically there's a 1099, a brokerage transaction statement that also needs to be reported, because I've gotten so many calls and we've helped so many people with writing response letters, because those numbers can be big, and you'll get a notice from the IRS saying, hey, you owe $38,000 of taxes, and people are like, what? And when I see those notices, I'm like, no, more than likely you actually have a $200 or $300 loss because the brokerage company who did the transaction for you actually charged you a fee. So you actually have a slight loss on it, but you're going to have to write the IRS. You're going to have to get into their system and respond to the notice. So that's a pro tip. Whenever you're dealing with some of these higher employer benefits, you just make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into. And this is why, once again, no matter how simple you want your life, because everybody's like, why would I hire a financial advisor? I'll just go buy, the total market index over at Vanguard or something. I'm like, don't worry. It's okay. I can continue. You can come to the Money Guy Show. We'll give you all the free advice you want. Learn, apply, grow. I know the complexity's coming, and that's the point. You'll graduate, and you'll eventually want to hire a financial advisor that can handle all the tedious, nerdy stuff that, and have somebody on your team so nothing's slipping through the cracks.
Love it.